It was an ordinary Thursday morning in the neighbourhood of Realengo, in the western zone of Rio de Janeiro. The sun rose on April 7th, 2011, casting its light over quiet streets as children, backpacks on their shoulders, walked toward Tasso da Silveira Municipal School. On that day, the school marked exactly 40 years since its founding. 4 decades of stories, learning, and generations that had passed through its halls, carrying with them the dreams and memories that only childhood can create. No one knew that this celebratory morning would be forever etched into Brazil's history. No one knew that before 9 o'clock, the entire country would hold its breath. At 8:15 in the morning, a well-dressed and seemingly calm young man approached the entrance of Tasso da Silveira Municipal School. He was carrying a backpack. He was 23 years old, with a face familiar to those hallways. After all, he had studied there between 1999 and 2002, attending middle school. His name was Wellington Menezes de Oliveira. He introduced himself as a speaker. The school was welcoming former students on that commemorative day, and his entry was granted without suspicion. Before proceeding, he stopped by the administrative office and requested a copy of his academic records. He encountered his former literature teacher, who recognized him and briefly spoke with him. Everything seemed completely normal. But inside the backpack Wellington carried were 2 revolvers, a .38 caliber Rossi and a .32 caliber Taurus. He was also equipped with a belt loaded with ammunition and a device known as a speed loader, which allows firearms to be reloaded with alarming speed. In a single motion, all the rounds are inserted into the cylinder. This was not a moment of impulse. It was the result of weeks, perhaps months, of meticulous and cold planning. Wellington walked up the stairs and entered an 8th grade classroom, where teacher Leila D'Angelo was conducting a Portuguese language lesson. He drew his weapons and began to shoot, and what followed was absolute chaos. Screams tore through the hallways. Students ran in every direction, hiding under desks, piling on top of one another. Teachers who heard the gunshots reacted on instinct to protect. They pushed desks and chairs against classroom doors, sent students to the back of the room, and tried to create barriers with whatever they had available. Wellington fired with a chilling coldness, but there was a disturbing pattern in his shots. Something investigators would only fully understand later, after analysing reports and victim testimonies. He aimed at the heads of the girls. At the boys, he fired at arms and legs, painful and severe injuries, but not necessarily fatal. It was as if the boys were obstacles to be neutralised, while the girls were the ultimate targets. Over the course of approximately 20 minutes, Wellington fired at least 60 shots. He moved through corridors, entered classrooms. He was preparing to go up to the 3rd floor, where more students were waiting, unaware that death was already stalking the lower levels. At that moment, approximately 400 students were inside the school. To understand what happened at Tasso da Silveira Municipal School, it is necessary to go back in time, long before April 7th. Before the revolvers, before the plans, before any shot was fired. Wellington was born on July 13th, 1987. He was given up as a baby at approximately 10 months old to an adoptive family. His biological mother suffered from severe mental disorders and had attempted to take her own life. He was raised by Dicea Menezes de Oliveira, a woman already in her 50s, as the youngest of 5 siblings. Being the youngest child of an older mother, he was treated differently. She knew she might not be present for long and tried to compensate for that reality with attention and affection. He was a shy, introspective child, frail, He wore thick-framed glasses, had prominent ears and spaced teeth, an appearance that, in the cruelties of childhood, made him an easy target for mockery. Neighbours in Realengo described him as quiet, solitary, without friends, always carrying books under his arm. He liked computers and games, spending hours browsing the internet. He never drank, never got involved with drugs, never got into trouble. He did not attend his own 8th grade graduation. He never had a girlfriend. At school, he was considered a good student. He never repeated a grade. There were no official records of misconduct. But what was not recorded was what happened in the hallways, in the courtyard, during breaks, the daily humiliations, the mockery, the systematic isolation he would later describe, years afterward, in a letter filled with pain. In his own words, written in that letter that would be found after the massacre.
A maioria das pessoas não te respeita. Acham que sou idiota. Se aproveitam de minha bondade. Me julgam antecipadamente. São falsas, desleais. Descobrirão quem sou da maneira mais radical. Uma ação que farei pelos meus semelhantes, que são humilhados, agredidos, desrespeitados em vários locais, principalmente em escolas e colégios, pelo fato de serem diferentes, de não fazerem parte do grupo dos infiéis, dos desleais, dos falsos, dos corruptos, dos maus. São humilhados por serem bons.
Many times, I was attacked by a group, and everyone nearby would mock me, taking pleasure in the humiliations I suffered without caring. The bullying Wellington endured was not an isolated episode. It was a prolonged, repetitive experience that gradually carved something inside him over the years. After finishing school, Wellington worked at a sausage factory, first as a general services worker and later as a stockroom assistant. Co-workers described him as a man of few words, the same description given by his neighbours. Always quiet, always alone. In 2010, his adoptive mother died of a heart attack. She was the last anchor tying him to the world. Those who knew the family described her as Wellington's safe harbour, and with her death, the psychiatric condition that had already been identified by the family and for which Wellington had unsuccessfully sought treatment with a psychologist, worsened significantly. He began living alone, and it was in that silence, in that total isolation, that the plans began to take shape. In the months leading up to the attack, Wellington embarked on a dark journey through the internet, immersing himself in content related to terrorism, religious fundamentalism, and firearms. He had grown up accompanying his mother to Jehovah's Witness meetings without ever becoming a follower. Later, after distancing himself from that community, he sought out other religions. And what he found was a confused and distorted mixture of beliefs that culminated in a form of personal fanaticism with no official affiliation to any group. He travelled 33 kilometres from the home where he had recently moved in Sepetiba to reach the school in Realengo, passing other schools along the way. That was the place where he had suffered. That was the place he had chosen. In the videos he recorded before the attack, and later found by investigators, Wellington spoke about bullying. He referred to those who, like him, had been victims of school violence as brothers. He said he had once been weak, but had become a warrior. He stated, "If they had acted earlier and done something serious to combat this type of behaviour, I would probably be alive. All those I killed would be alive. These were the words of someone who had transformed his pain into hatred, his suffering into a sentence. Someone who decided that the world that had caused him so much harm would have to pay the price. But the price he imposed was the most unjust possible. Children who were not even the same ones who had humiliated him years earlier. In the letter found in his pocket, Wellington described seeing impurity in the children. He wrote about how he wanted his body to be buried. His religious references were distorted and disconnected, a personal form of fundamentalism, constructed in the silence of a solitary room. But the pattern of the shots revealed something else, something that was extensively analysed by experts who studied the case, a deliberate choice to target girls as lethal victims. Of the 12 fatalities, 10 were female. Most of the injured were also girls. The boys, in the majority of cases, were shot in non-lethal areas of the body, as if they were obstacles in the path of the real targets. The misogyny that existed within Wellington was as real as the trauma of the bullying. Less than 300 metres from Tasso da Silveira Municipal School, 3rd Sergeant of the Military Police, Marcio Alexandre Alves, 38, was working that morning at a traffic checkpoint operated by the Highway Police Battalion. His routine did not involve shootouts or chases. It was the daily, repetitive work of traffic control. Then a wounded boy came running toward him. Alan Mendes da Silva was only 12 years old and had been shot in the face. Even injured, even in shock, the boy managed to escape the school and run in search of help. He is a true hero for having survived and found the strength to get out and seek help, Sergeant Alves would say years later. Alves did not hesitate. He ran toward the school. When he entered the building, he found Wellington in the hallway, preparing to go up to the 3rd floor. The sergeant shouted, "Drop the weapon! Police!" Wellington turned and aimed his gun at the officer, but he did not fire. Perhaps survival instinct hesitated for a second. Perhaps he already knew this was the end he had planned. Sergeant Alves fired. Wellington was hit in the abdomen and fell to the ground. Then, in a premeditated act, as with everything else that day, he raised the gun to his own head and pulled the trigger. The shooting was over. But the pain had barely begun. When silence finally took over the hallways of Tasso da Silveira Municipal School, what remained was a scene of horror. 12 children were dead. Another 22 had been seriously injured. 10 of the fatalities were girls. 2 were boys. They were between 12 and 16 years old. They had names, stories, dreams, families waiting for them at home. 12 names. 12 lives interrupted in a single day. It was the first time in Brazil that a mass school attack had no connection to gang violence or organised crime. It was something different, something the country did not yet know how to name, but which the world had already seen in Columbine, in Virginia Tech, and in so many other places where tragedy had arrived before. In the hours following the tragedy, desperate families rushed to the Forensic Medical Institute, mothers who did not know whether their children were among the dead or the injured, fathers who arrived at the school in haste only to be met with yellow police tape, ambulances, and the sound of cries echoing from within the walls. Families of 4 of the victims made a decision that expressed, with heartbreaking generosity, the depth of their humanity. They chose to donate their children's organs. In the midst of unimaginable grief, they decided that some meaning could still be drawn from their loss. The city government of Rio de Janeiro honoured the 12 children by naming 12 municipal daycare centres after them. The first was the Samira Pires Ribeiro Daycare Centre in Guaratiba. In 2015, a monument was unveiled in the square in front of the school. 11 bronze sculptures represent each of the children whose faces were recreated. A butterfly represents the 12th victim, the family requested that her face not be depicted. A butterfly, a symbol of transformation and delicacy, preserves the memory of one who can no longer fly. And at the center of it all, a mother. The Realengo massacre left marks that extend far beyond a neighborhood in Rio de Janeiro. It was the first major mass school attack in Brazil that had no connection to organized crime. And this reality forced the country to look at itself in the mirror. Debates about bullying, mental health in schools, school safety, and youth radicalization erupted in the media, in parliament, and in conversations across the country. The phenomenon of bullying, often dismissed as child's play or nonsense, began to be treated with a level of urgency it had never received before. In 2015, Brazil enacted Law No. 13,185, which established the National Program to combat systematic intimidation, bullying throughout the country. Tasso da Silveira Municipal School, which in 2011 was a typical public school in a low-income area of Rio, gradually became a model institution, equipped with improved infrastructure and a permanently stationed municipal security presence. But perhaps the most important legacy is what cannot be measured in laws or infrastructure. It is what is conveyed in Adriana Silveira's talks when she speaks of Luisa's smile. It is what lives in the balloons released every morning on April 7th over the school courtyard. It is the memory of 12 children who went to school on an ordinary day and never returned home.